Well, it's an extraordinary honor to be here, and I'd like to thank you for making it possible, Daryl and Sumi. And Steve, thank you for the very kind introduction, and I never will forget the wonderful time we spent together. There were two other grad students at the time, and we really did live on a yacht. And we hopped off the yacht in a little Zodiac and went to these little islands and caught lizards and measured them and thought we were doing science. Not only that, the captain and his wife cooked the meals on this ship, on this little boat. So it was just fabulous, and in many ways that's the best possible context to learn biology, because you're actively engaging the material, and every night you can conjecture about what it all means. So it's just great to see you again. Okay, so what I'd like to talk about, as you can tell, is something about the diversity of gender expression and sexuality in the animal kingdom. And as you can imagine, this is somewhat controversial. The reason is, of course, that the discovery, or the realization, if you will, that there is so much diversity in gender and sexuality is running through our entire society now. You see it in the religious sector, where many denominations are wrestling with the implications of human diversity and gender and sexuality for the limits to inclusion. And the question is just how much diversity is properly included in a denomination's worship. And similarly, in the political sector, there's a lot of debate about the extent to which equal rights is to be extended to various forms of diversity. And you might have hoped that diversity in gender and sexuality would not be problematic in science, that we are, after all, these objective, thoughtful, neutral students of nature, and if we find diversity, we just recognize it and characterize it and try to explain it. But the emergence of a diversity of gender and sexuality in the animal kingdom has been as problematic for scientists as it's been in the religious sector and the political sector. So what I'd like to do here is, first of all, to take you through some of the examples of animals which are problematic from a biological point of view. If you put yourself in the shoes of someone who's a biologist, you can appreciate how these types of organisms are troublesome. And then I also, at Daryl's request really, have offered some slides about diversity in gender and sexuality among people, so that you can see that humans are more diverse than you may have imagined, but more importantly, that the representation of diversity in gender and sexuality is the representation differs from country to country and culture to culture, so that we're dealing with, if you will, a species-wide or pan-specific degree of human diversity, but exactly how we characterize that and what roles these various people play in the local institutions is quite variable. And that's very interesting, I think, because it places the our Western characterization of diversity in a context which means that we should view the accounts of this from science and from Western science and from medicine with some caution and some modesty. Okay, so concerning the biology then, the account of gender and sexuality that we inherit, if you will, comes from Darwin. Darwin's writings in 1871, and of course, as you know, Darwin is responsible for the theory of evolution. and many very important discoveries. But there's one topic area, one particular topic area called sexual selection that Darwin wrote on and that I'm critical of. And it's the part of Darwin's work that pertains to traits like the peacock's tail. And these are called ornaments and armaments. The armaments would be traits like the antlers on deer, and the ornaments would be these flashy tails that peacocks have. So this is what Darwin wrote in 1871. He said, "Males of almost all animals have stronger passions than females." Now that's an empirical generalization, as you can see. Notice the phrase, almost all. So in an arbitrary species, it's anticipated that the male will be more passionate. Here you have the origin of the passionate male phrase. Then the next one, the female, with the rarest of exceptions, is less eager than the male. She is coy. So here we have the origin of the phrase coy female. And again, we have this claim, the rarest of exceptions, that it's supposed to be true of an arbitrary species that you pick up, that the female should be coy. So these are claims, these are universal claims about gender roles throughout the animal kingdom. And he acknowledges some exceptions, but you're being invited to dismiss them as being relatively unimportant and rare. And together with these, there's a story of social life in animals, family life, if you will, or the precursor to family life. And Darwin writes, females choose mates who are more attractive, vigorous, and well-armed, just as man can give beauty to his male poultry. Now, a bunch of things here. So this is, first of all, an explanation, Darwin's explanation, for why the peacock has a tail, has the beautiful tail that it does. According to Darwin, the females breed the males to have these tails. And the analogy is to the way a farmer might breed roosters for cockfighting. Okay? So, and in this account, females are supposed to find the tail attractive, and they are also supposed to find armaments attractive. So in a similar vein, females are supposed to like the large antlers that a male antler has. However, the armaments have an additional function. It's that they might be used in male-male competition or male-male combat and enable a male to get access to a female. So this gives rise to two forms of so-called sexual selection. One is the female choice part, where females choose males for their ornaments. The other is the male-male combat part, or intrasexual selection, where males fight for access to females. But in the Darwinian account, females actually prefer and find attractive the victors in male-male competition. So there's a wonderful congruence of interest between what females want and what males are able to achieve. Now, as you can imagine, that's problematic in and of itself, because from the standpoint of a female, the best father may not be the best competitor. And so that's fortunately doesn't arise in the Darwinian account. Now, so all of these points right here are suspect. Are the generalizations true? And perhaps more importantly, on the third point down here, is this an accurate account of the social dynamic between males and females? Okay. Now, of course, one's reaction might be, well, this is just beating up on Darwin, who wrote in the 1800s, and it just isn't fair, right? Let's cut this guy some slack. Well, the contemporary restatement of Darwin is about the same thing. So I call this sexual selection 1.1 as the version enunciated in the 70s. And I'm quoting here from Jerry Coyne, a geneticist at the University of Chicago. And the reason I'm singling him out is he wrote a vitriolic review of my book. And so he says, and I believe arrogantly, we now understand. Got it? Males who can produce many offspring with only minimal investment spread their genes most effectively by mating promiscuously. So now we have the promiscuous male instead of the passionate male. And female reproductive output is far more constrained by the metabolic costs of producing eggs or offspring, and thus a female's interests are served more by mate quantity than by mate quality than by mate quantity. So instead of the coy female, we now have the constrained female. It's basically the same narrative, as you can see. And the nuance right here is that the reason males are supposed to be promiscuous is that sperm are supposed to be cheap. And so males are supposed to be able to just go around and fertilize any female they can find, and every now and then they get lucky and they get to have an offspring. And the female, on the other hand, has to watch out for all these cruising males and check them out for their genes and make sure that she only sleeps with the ones with good genes. Okay? And you see this narrative turning up in nature shows all the time. You see it in the popular media. And we're supposed to understand from biology that this is a true account of nature. Okay? And that's the part where I get bent out of shape over, because I don't think that biology says this. So let me give you some examples that are problematic. So here's an example. Oh, the cursor does work here. So one of the very problematic phenomena is so-called sex role reversal. So these are seahorses right here. And now it happens to be the case that among the vertebrates, if there's parental care, so in fish, if there's parental care, it's usually provided by the male. And in birds, when there's parental care, it tends to be provided equally by both male and female, who are both bringing caterpillars and so on to the nest and feeding the nestling. And in mammals, the parental care is given mostly by the female in the course of gestation and subsequent lactation. So now that's very important in and of itself, because that means there's no necessary connection between gamete size and parental role. So male fish make sperm, tiny sperm. Those sperm should be cheap, right? According to this party line. And yet they're the ones providing the parental care in males generally. And in birds, it's 50-50, and in mammals, it's the other way around. So you don't want to generalize. Right off the bat, you know that it's not correct to generalize from gamete size to parental role. And that's particularly brought out in something like the seahorses, where there's so-called sex role reversal. Now, when male fish do provide parental care, there are various forms that they can give it in. They can actually guard a territory where the eggs are. Another thing is they can carry the eggs around with them. And sometimes they carry the eggs in their cheeks, and they're called mouth brooders. And sometimes they carry them glued onto their tummy. And with pipe fish, this is a pipe fish down here. A pipe fish is called a pipe fish. You see them on coral reefs because it looks like a little flute because of the way the mouth is, you know. And so they glue the eggs to their tummy. And a seahorse is related to a pipe fish in that it has a skin flap around its tummy. And the eggs are actually stored in the skin flap. So therefore, what females do is they go deposit eggs in the skin flap of the seahorse, sort of the reverse of a kangaroo. And so therefore, the male becomes in effect pregnant. This male seahorse has the female dumping eggs into its, here's another male seahorse with eggs being dumped into it. So this is called sexual reversal, you see, because this is exactly the opposite of the Darwinian story. Right here, which sex is in short supply. What happens with seahorses and sexual reverse species is that there are fewer males around who are ready to accept eggs than there are females ready to deliver eggs. It's actually cheaper for the female to make eggs than it is for the male to accept the eggs and graduate them out as little fry. So this is sexual reversal, and the question is, when would such a phenomenon occur? But the mere existence of such a phenomenon is a direct contradiction to the Darwinian generalizations. And so that has then led to a literature which tries to explain why there might be sexual reversal based on the local ecology of them. However, that, of course, undercuts and subverts the generalization about sex roles right off the bat. So that leads, the existence of sexual reversal leads to still another modification of sexual selection, it's definition. And you can see here a progression of definitions of sexual selection that have to keep taking into account more and more complexity and more reality. So now, the sex with the higher proportion of individuals available to mate, usually but not necessarily the male, spreads its gene most effectively by mating promiscuously, whereas the other sex spreads its genes most effectively by selecting to mate with the genetically best partner. So now we have, with this kind of definition, you see, we have sexual reversal, but we still have the same two roles. It's just the roles are not necessarily attached to any one sex. So the male could be the promiscuous one, or the female could, or vice versa. Okay? So now the question arises of, are there just two roles out there? Okay? Well, the problem is, to begin with, that the problem is with binaries, and whether binaries are realistic. Now, the most elementary binary, you might say, is the distinction between a male and a female, the male, okay? So is that stable? Well, one of the most interesting phenomena is that a great many species change sex. Now, what does it mean to change sex? Okay, now a biologist will define the sex of a species, of an individual, based on the size of the gamete that it makes. And a gamete, just for the record, refers to the gametes refer to the cells that have to fuse to make an embryo. So the gametes are eggs and sperm. Okay? And so the word gamete lumps together both eggs and sperm. Now, a very interesting generalization is that across the entire animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, across all living things, almost all, like 99.999% of the species, have only two sizes of gametes, small ones and big ones. By definition, the small one's called a sperm and the big one's called an egg. So they're like zero, almost zero species with three sizes of gametes or four sizes of gametes or a continuum of gametes from tiny to big. They don't occur. So there is a well-defined binary at the gametic level. It's not absolute, but it is as close to absolute as you can get in the real world. Now, but then ask yourself, what about the whole organism? What about the body, the animal that's actually making the gametes? Does it make only one size of gamete all its life? Well, fine. If it did, you could unambiguously say, well, this is a male or it's a female, depending on the size of the gamete. But the point of the fact is that for lots of species, they change the size of the gamete that they make. So these are fish from a coral reef right here. You can go snorkeling on a coral reef, such as those around Hawaii or Tahiti. And about 40% of the fish you see swimming around, including a lot of the fish that are in people's aquaria, are members of species that change sex. So this is the blue-headed wrasse here, it changes as it ages from female to male. This is the clownfish, like Finding Dr. Nemo, like the clownfish that lives in sea anemone. This goes the other way. Here individuals go from male to female. And this is something called a hamlet, in which they're both male and female at the same time, so that they're manufacturing both eggs and sperm at the same time. They don't self-fertilize, and what happens is that one of them will release eggs, and the other will release a sperm, and then they'll flip over and change roles, and then the other will release a sperm and release an egg. And biologists use the phrase hermaphrodism to describe individuals who change sex through time. So these would be called sequentially hermaphroditic, and this would be called simultaneously hermaphroditic. Now this is quite common in fish, less common on land in animals. However, if you think about it for a second, almost all the plants you know are hermaphroditic, because your typical flower has an anther that's making pollen and has a stigma that the pollen is sticking to, and which produces a seed when it's pollinated. So your typical flower has both male parts and female parts in it simultaneously. By and large, plant species are hermaphroditic. And in the ocean, a lot of animal species are hermaphroditic. And I say all this to you because it means that the sex binary at the whole organism level is not stable. It's highly variable. So that's then even a prior problem for a theory like sexual selection, which is seeing very clear gender roles and attaching them to sexes. The sexes change, and then as we will now see, there are more than 2 gender roles possible. So what about the number of roles? So, the one is passionate, the other is coy. Well, let's take a species right here in which nobody changes sex. So a bird that makes sperm all its life, and another one that makes eggs all its life. Okay, clearly defined males and females. But it turns out that there are 3 kinds of males. So this is a species of seabird called a ruff, named after its collar right here, which is supposed to be reminiscent of a fur collar, a ruff. And there are two kinds of collars: the black collar, the white collar, and then this male here, which has no collar, and the female has no collar. Now, the way this system works is that the females go flock by themselves and catch food. And when the females want to mate, they go to an area called a lek, which is spelled L-E-K. And you can think of it as a red light district of males. Really, a bunch of males sitting in a place in little courts, displaying and trying to recruit sex. So the females come in and they look at all these males displaying at them, and then they settle down into a male's territory, and then they make love. That might be a little too anthropomorphic for some of you. So they mate, all right? And so the males are hanging out there in this lek. Now, I should say the males, I mean the black-collared males. The white-collared males, on the other hand, flock with the females longer. And they leave the females, and before the females come to the lek, the white-collared males come to the lek themselves, and they are then courted by the black-collared males. So the black-collared males court the white-collared males, and some of the courts then wind up having 2 males in them, one black and one white-collared. And then the females come, and the females evidently prefer to mate with a pair of males rather than with a single male. And so the black-collared male has shared paternity with the white-collared male in order to increase the attractiveness and the number of visits from the female. Okay, and then there's still a third type of male whose social role in the social system is not presently known because it's relatively recently discovered, and it's the uncollared male. And these were hard to detect because, of course, ornithologists were using the collar to assess sex. So you actually have to catch the male and inspect it closely, catch the bird and inspect it closely in order to find out that it's a male. And lo and behold, it's a male but doesn't have a collar. And so that means the field work gets a lot harder. You can't make assumptions. And now, just think about this, though. This means there are two kinds of males. It's not just a passionate male. Right? So we already have a multiplicity of roles right here. So I've, with the permission of humanists, extended the definition of gender so that it applies to animals as well as just to people. So I define gender as the morphology and behavior by which an animal expresses its sexual identity. Its sexual identity is whether it makes eggs or sperm. How it expresses its sexual identity, both in terms of body, morphology, and in terms of behavior, I call the gender. So in this case, there would be two genders of males, actually three genders of males, and one gender of female. So there's not a binary in gender, there's a multiplicity of gender. Now the plot thickens because it turns out that the mating is not only between members of the same sex or even members of the same gender. Here's a case of a black-collared male mounting an uncollared male. And I might add right here that it can also go the other way around. The uncollared male can mount the black-collared male. This just happens to be the only picture I have. So I would consider this to be a homosexual but heterogenderal mating. Okay? Now, why do these occur? So let me show you an example from lions of a homosexual and homogenderal mating in the wild. Now we know these are both lions right here because they have male lions because they have the mane. And this was taken by a photographer on vacation in the Serengeti, and I was lecturing in Brazil, and these were published in the Brazilian equivalent of Time magazine. And one of the editors came to me and said, "You have to have these slides. You just have to have them." And I said, "Yes." He's right. So here's a sequence of slides taken by a professional photographer who was on vacation. So here's a lion who comes up to the other lion. And he moves up, and you see how he nuzzles them? Now, any of you who have cats will know this. You know, they rub up to you and they want to be fed or something like that. Petted, purr. And so then this one pulls off to the side, and the other one comes and mounts it. Okay. Now that is friendship. This is obviously unforced solicitation of a same-sex mating. Now, you also may know that lions hunt in packs. Lions work as buddies. You're a nothing. If you're a lion, you're a nothing if you don't have a good buddy, because they work in packs to knock off other packs in order to take charge of prides of females. So my explanation, which seems rather obvious, is that the function of the same-sex sexuality is to promote cooperation. And it does that by producing a mutual exchange of pleasure. So pleasure is the medium by which the animals can work together. And I analogize this situation right here to team sports. Now, if you've noticed in team sports how much physical contact there is between the players, how much high-fiving, like taking basketball, they're all high-fiving and touching each other and so forth. And that what happens is that one player will say, throw the ball up for a basket, and if they're going to make an alley-oop pass, one of them sails the basket into the air, the other one jumps at the same time and gets a basket, and everyone's happy and they go high five afterwards. And it was a lot of fun to make an alley-oop pass. So there's fun in cooperation. Now, I'm arguing that the fun in cooperation is above and beyond the payoff. Because consider 2 foul shots, which are also just worth 2 points. It's boring and it's no fun. The same thing with soccer. It's fun to make a goal in a combination play. It's boring to see a goal made in a penalty shot after the game is over. And if you hear athletes interviewed, they talk about the fun of the camaraderie. And if you also talk to people who have been veterans, and by the way, it's Veterans Day, so I'd like to call out and thank any of you who are veterans. And veterans will tell you that a lot of the fun came from the camaraderie, even in spite of the danger. So I'm assuming right here that this is the fun that underlies the cooperation that the animals subsequently conduct, and that the reciprocal exchange of pleasure is the vehicle to the immediate vehicle to motivate cooperative activity. In any case, this certainly occurs. And of course, this is yet, and what is theoretically so subversive about same-sex sexuality is that it undercuts the picture of mating as all about the exchange of sperm to produce a fertilization. Okay? And actually, if you look at the heterosexual matings, in almost all the species, many, many more matings take place than offspring are produced, which makes on its face look as though mating is a very inefficient process. But if mating was so important, it would be efficient. What's really going on here is that there's another function being served by the mating, even in heterosexual matings. And we're just seeing that in spades here when you see it in homosexual matings, because there obviously it can't be an exchange of sperm leading to a fertilization. Now, getting back to the peacock, here's how peacocks mate. Now, is the female over here eyeing the male for his genes? And notice that the peacock is displaying its rear end of the female, not its front. So is the female, looking at all these males and saying, that's the one? No, the male jumps on the female. The most you could say about the female is that she doesn't run away. If that's choice, that's what's going on. And there's another example right here as well, so that was. So as you can see that this is repeatable. Notice how he bites her on the nape of the neck, which is interesting. But this is quite repeatable in the way this is done. Now again, the sexual selection story has it that the reason the peacock has the tail is that the female's casing out all the males, finding the one with the best tail, and sleeping with that male. Now look at the actual behavior and ask yourself, is that even a plausible story? And I don't think so. And you might be interested to learn that the data on this, there's a follow-up studies on this, fail to detect that even this quintessential example from Darwin is not verifiable. Now, so this then leads to sexual selection 2.0. Now, notice how we're getting farther and farther away from the original definition of sexual selection. Now, sexual selection is just the selection for traits associated with competition for mates, period. This is from David Schuker in 2009. Sexual selection is not dependent on what have been termed sex roles, which is a clear departure from the Darwinian account. And mating, and what area of biology is supposed to predict sex roles? Well, that's a new area called mating systems theory, which is what seeks to address why particular mating or breeding systems form. Now, the reason I think David's analysis here is particularly important is that, apart from distancing the field from what I think is now a discredited account of sexual selection, the earlier account, he comes up with sufficient conditions for falsifying sexual selection. And he says, okay, if either of these are true, if either of these occur, then sexual selection doesn't happen. So this guy's willing to put on the table what it takes to falsify sexual selection. So one doesn't just have to take pot shots at it the way I do. You could actually get this kind of information and settle the matter. So here you could say, if all partners have equal genetic quality, well, if that's the case, then there's no sexual selection. Or if successful partnerships represent a random sample of pairs of individual phenotypes and genotypes. And so if either of those occur, sexual selection is not supposed to occur. And you may not come as any surprise to you that these sufficient conditions are both met in studies that have been published in the literature. So I've been pointing that out. It published in Nature, long 24-year studies, which show exactly this, that the partners are of equal genetic quality and that the partnerships are random samples of pairs. But of course, that's only just a couple studies. But it seems to me absolutely clear at this point that hanging on to sexual selection is a waste of time. But the discipline is going to keep doing it for at least another decade. But it's changing slowly as the existence of these replacement definitions reveals. So let me switch now to humans and tie that back in. Now, the diversity in humans is, as I said earlier, manifested in different cultures in different ways, but it's still there. Now, these are slides of gender and sexuality variation among Native Americans, particularly the Navajo and also the Zuni. Now, the Native American, now not all of Native American nations, but only some of the nations have this, and gender variant and sexuality variant people are termed two-spirited because they're supposed to embody both male and female elements, either to their body or to their personality. So this is Ostish, a male-bodied, two-spirited woman. And then these are female-bodied warriors, two-spirited warriors. And you can see the breasts right here on this warrior. Here's another woman dressed as a warrior in a rather jaunty pose. And notice here that there's no attempt to cover the breasts, and there's no attempt to hide body. And what's interesting in the two spirits is that gender identity, that is the genders that these people feel, is expressed through their occupation, their choice of occupation, not through their body. And so if you want to be a woman, Zuni, then you take up basket weaving. And if you want to be a man, then you go fight like a warrior. And that's it. You don't have to make your body look like other men or your body look like other women. Now, in India, where I've also looked firsthand, I was at a conference, an AIDS outreach conference that the UN organized in New Delhi in 2006. And the condition for my going is I said I'd like to spend another couple days interviewing people who are Hijra, which is spelled H-I-J-R-A, Hijra. And these are folks who, as you'll see some pictures, are also gender variant. All the Hijra, however, are male to female in their orientation. The Hijra category doesn't include female to male the way the two-spirited category does among Indians. So I went to a shanty town. This is underneath a highway right here. And then these are some of the people. This is one of my favorite women, a very thoughtful, peaceful, and dignified woman. But there are a lot of them. And here is a family, and this woman here is a guru. Now, the way this society is set up is that a guru, apparently throughout northern India, different sections of the country are franchised, so to speak, into different domains. And within each domain, one individual is in charge, and the individual in charge would be a guru, and her apprentices would be chelas. Now, a guru supervises, if you will, the chelas, receives a cut from their earnings, but also provides a home for them and protection. And this is her husband and a child, and I don't know their relationship. And so this guru had an apartment in which she housed a lot of the chelas. Now, the occupation that the chelas have here is, see, the Hijra are like a caste. You can think of them as a caste, a lower caste. And what they do is they make a lot of money through begging or through hooking up to weddings or christenings and singing dances and singing. And I've tape recorded their songs. And then they extort, basically, the young couple to give them money. And then after they've sung their dance and get their money, then they leave. Now, so I'll get to those in a second. Now, a few other things about the Hijra. The Hijra have an indigenous form of morphological sex reassignment surgery. So in the Indian society, their identification as females depends on how they look, not so much on what their occupation is. So therefore, you wind up having a native form of sex reassignment surgery that's called a nirvan, that's been in India for back before the pre-colonial times. So that one finds that the key issue in a lot of these cultures is what the criterion is for gender. If the society has morphology as the criterion for gender identification, then that gives rise to or provokes the culture into making procedures to make gender, to lead to morphological conformity. And if the society doesn't have gender, or doesn't have morphology as a criterion for gender identity, then you find there's no such procedure being used. Instead, as I mentioned, there's an attachment to occupation. Now, at this, there's a whole lot can be said about the Hijra. They're very interesting. And in India, you can have your passport can actually read male, female, or I believe H if you're a Hydra. So that they actually have 3 legally identifiable genders, human genders. And this was someone from Thailand. I took pictures of all sorts of people here. There are people from all over Southeast Asia. This woman was from New Zealand, and she was a transgendered member of parliament. Now, closer to where my home now is, this was someone from American Samoa. And throughout Polynesia, there's also an expression of gender variation. And these are called mahu, M-A-H-U, or M-A-H-O-O, depending on the pronunciation. And in Hawaii, this is a leader of the mahu there. And I went to a performance with mahu, and it was like a fashion show. It was very interesting because in the gay culture here on the mainland, there's a subculture of the gay culture for drag queens. And the drag queens participate in something called the imperial court. And they have big shows and elect the person who's got the fanciest outfit and so on. And then the winner then rides in the Gay Pride Parade, for example, in San Francisco. Now, these big shows, are part of the gay culture. In contrast, the mahu shows right here are part of the women's culture. And the audience here was not gay men. It was a bunch of women for a night out. It was a women's night out. And it had a very different social connotation to it. It was very interesting. And then I also have a couple slides here referring to ancient expressions of gender and sexuality variation. These are the Cybelean priestesses that were active in the time of the Roman Empire, and temples to Cybele are being excavated in England, and that then leads me to this slide. And when I talked about the occurrence of others on earth and in heaven, the reference to in heaven is to the passage in the Bible in Acts in the New Testament concerning the baptizing of the Ethiopian eunuch. And the Ethiopian eunuch looks very much like a Cybelean priestess to me, and very similar to the Hydras. Oh, and Hydras sometimes translated as eunuch as well. But again, that's never accurate, because what's been done by these operations is the construction of a feminine body, not the elimination of something else. And that reflects the rather pejorative language of anthropologists in this area. So that you get the Ethiopian eunuch is really a gender variant person. And the eunuchs, you can read the descriptions of eunuchs at the time of the New Testament, is that because, of course, their testicles were volunteered or removed. I mean, they usually volunteered for this. Then they wind up getting a feminine morphology and a feminine appearance. And therefore, if someone is standing by the side of the road and sees a chariot go by, the only way you'd tell that the person in it was a eunuch was by their appearance. And so the Ethiopian eunuch was then, it went by the apostle Philip. Philip sees him, flags him down, sees that the Ethiopian eunuch is reading the Bible. Philip hops up into the chariot with him, and they read the Bible together. Then they come to a stream, And the Ethiopian eunuch asks Philip if she can be baptized. He says, sure, if you believe in God, that's all you need. And so they both get out of the chariot and they go down to the river, and these pictures are supposed to be Philip baptizing the Ethiopian eunuch. So the Ethiopian eunuch is both dark-skinned Ethiopian, right, and as well as a eunuch, so gender variant as well as racially variant. And this is a remarkable example of inclusion in the early Christian church. And the Roman Catholic theologian and I have written an article about this particular passage in the Bible and its relevance as an affirmative statement to inclusion in the Bible. So that will give you a survey, therefore, of gender and sexuality variation in animals and also in people. And that raises then the question of the seminar here, and this is my final slide. What about diversity in science, technology, engineering, and medicine? So is diversity in GES lacking? By GES here, I mean gender expression and sexuality. Well, it obviously is. And Darryl wanted me to speak personally about this, so because I'm not a social scientist and I haven't taken data on this, so this, what I have to say, is anecdotal. But it certainly is true when I was at Stanford that there was nobody in any one of the science departments who was either closeted or not, who was gay or lesbian. There were, and of course nobody who was trans. And there were some gay and lesbian faculty in the humanities, but definitely none in the sciences. And there were a couple maybe in the med school. There were a fair representation of gender and sexuality variant people among the staff, but not in the faculty. So I think it's manifestly true that at the faculty level, the diversity is lacking. And so that comes to the question of if so, why does it matter? Like, who cares? Is this just a matter of social justice? I mean, don't gays and lesbians and trans people deserve a chance to be faculty? Well, yeah, in some sense that might be true. But there's a more substantive reason, and that is that the research that's done without this diversity is incomplete and inaccurate, because the research on gender diversity in animals has been done by scientists who are themselves representatives of diverse gender expression and sexuality. And that's because what you find is destabilizing. If you're happy with the Darwinian account, then you're not going to try to falsify it. And if you're coming from a position in which that account is clearly inaccurate, then you're going to do something about it. And the scientific method depends. I don't know how you feel about the scientific method and whether you think it always works or doesn't work, or whether you think scientists are objective or not. So setting aside the reliability of scientific knowledge for the moment, let's just assume it's reliable. The scientific method, no matter how conservative you are about science, depends ultimately on having a suite of hypotheses to test. There's got to be a bunch of hypotheses put on the table for the scientific hypothesis to work. And without a diverse group in proposing the hypotheses, you're going to get a subset of the relevant hypotheses to look at. And that's, I think, what has afflicted evolutionary biology up until this time, and I think also anthropology and the relevant social sciences as well. So then the question is, so it does matter. It matters to the substance of those fields. Now, why is it caused? Is it caused by external barriers? Yes, it is to some extent caused by external barriers, because anyone who is LGBT and is on the faculty can give you stories about what they've had to put up with. And I don't want to go into a lot of anecdotes myself on that regard, but take it from me that that the insults are many and varied. And so, and your access to money and to authority are limited. But then that leads, though, to number 4, which could the lack of diversity be caused by a lack of, if you will, internal aspirations. And this is also a big problem because 3 feeds into 4. I remember quite vividly some years ago in the church that I was going to, one of my friends had a brother who was about to transition, and she asked me to help him do this. So I met with him, who became her, and major at San Francisco State. And I said, that's fine, you need to keep going and doing that. But a month later, she had dropped out of college and was working on a stage crew for one of the theater companies. And she just did not see herself as ever being a physicist and could not identify with a professional role. And of course, people in that situation are dealing with a lot. There's a lot of stress, and it's very difficult to project oneself into a professional role under those circumstances. So I think that, so the advice I always have to people who are just transitioning is to aim high. Don't forget to aim high, because the trials and tribulations of the transition period, and this is true if you're coming out as gay or lesbian as well, the trials and tribulations of dealing with what you have to do within will be over, and you're going to have to make a living at some point.